The Starting 11 was founded in September 2018 by 7 Brown students. Originally a blog that published NFL articles with a focus on statistical analysis, we expanded our platform to Instagram in April of 2019. Since then, the account has accrued over 15,000 followers and posts daily NFL content ranging from rankings to polls to fun facts. Today, we are honored to conduct our first interview with a former NFL player. At this moment, I will hand it over to Rohan, who will introduce our guest, and then Ryan and TJ will conduct the interview.
Today, it's my great pleasure to welcome and introduce legendary former NFL running back, Curtis Martin. Originally from Pittsburgh, Mr. Martin played his entire college career at the University of Pittsburgh and was drafted by the New England Patriots in the 1995 NFL Draft. And he stayed there for 3 seasons. He spent the rest of his 12-year NFL career with the New York Jets. And all in all, he started 166 total games, rushed for 14,101 yards, good for the 6th most of all time and the 4th most of all time by the time of his retirement. He holds the rare distinction of having recorded 10 consecutive 1,000-yard rushing seasons, is a former Offensive Rookie of the Year, a 3-time All-Pro selection, a 5-time Pro Bowler, and the winner of the NFL rushing title in 2004, becoming the oldest player to ever do so at age 31. He's also appeared in 10 playoff games, including a Super Bowl with the Patriots. And off the field, Mr. Martin is a recipient of the Ed Block Courage Award from 2001, the Bart Star Man of the Year Award in 2006, and he's also heavily invested in charity work, including through the Curtis Martin Job Foundation. In 2012, he was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and his number of 28 was retired by the New York Jets. Welcome, Mr. Martin. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you guys for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yep. So the first thing I'll ask is we'll start at the beginning of your career. We'll talk about, so can you tell us a little bit about your childhood growing up in Pittsburgh and how those years shaped you as a football player and as a person?
Yeah, well, I grew up in a really, I would say, tough neighborhood, middle section of Pittsburgh called Homewood. And in Homewood, we, per capita, would oftentimes have the highest murder rate in the country. I grew up in the midst of a lot of turmoil. My father was a severe drug addict, which led to him being extremely abusive to my mother. And as a 4 and 5-year-old, I'd often watch my mother get beat up by my father. And of course, that's not a good image for a little kid to have. I mean, some days she would wear some sunglasses to work just because she had a black eye. I started living between my mother and my grandmother, who became like my second mother. And she was just as close to me as my mother was. And when I was 9, we found her murdered. We found her lying in the bed with a knife in her chest and a broken neck and eyes wide open and blood everywhere. The guy had robbed her for something like $140 and a couple pieces of jewelry. By the time I was 13, my other, who became like my third mother, which was my mother's sister, she was killed. She was burned to death. And from the time I was 13 to 20, I had probably, somewhere around 35 to 40 other family members or friends that had been killed, not died from, cancer or old age or anything like that. In my environment, we didn't expect to live up to the point where we were, senior citizens. My goal was to live till I was 21. And I was almost killed for the first time when I was 14. And then again at 15 when I had a loaded gun to my head and the bullet just wouldn't come out. The guy pulled the trigger several times. And so all that to say, I come from a really, really rough background. And the way that background ended up helping me was because my senior year, my childhood best friend, there's this little place we all used to hang out, and someone jumped out of a car thinking he was someone else and shot him in the chest with a shotgun. He was the quarterback for the high school football team. So he ran about 50 yards and collapsed and died. And my mother just told me, she said, listen, you have to do something just to get away from this neighborhood it for a couple hours. So she made me get involved with some activity after school. And she didn't care what it was, football, baseball, basketball, glee club, whatever it may have been. But I just chose football because it was the most natural thing. Didn't want to play football, didn't like playing football. But the head football coach had been asking me to play my entire time. And my senior year, I just decided to really commit to it, stay out of the way of my environment and play football. And, you know, years later, here we are today.
Thank you for sharing that with us, man. And you, as you just mentioned, you didn't start playing football until you were a senior in high school. And obviously you had a great career after that. So how did you get off to such a quick start in the sport?
You know, it's interesting. Well, senior year wasn't my official start. It was just the first year that I said, okay, I'm going to go out and I'm going to be on an organized team and I'm going to play and really be committed to it. And I'll never forget, I walked up on the field on a Wednesday. This is after the season had started. It was before the first scrimmage game, though. And I told the coach, I said, look, I know you've been asking me for years to play for the team. I said, I'm finally ready. I'll play this year. They got me some equipment, you know, and it was on a Wednesday. The first scrimmage game was Saturday. They just taught me a few plays, and he put me in the first game. And the first time they pitched me the ball to the left, I ran like a 82-yard touchdown. And that was like my introduction to football. And from there, throughout that season, I ended up breaking a lot of high school records and always knew I had the talent. I just didn't want to do it. And I started getting looked at by a lot of scouts, and I ended up getting scholarships to just about most of the major schools in the country. But because football wasn't realistic and even college wasn't realistic for me, I just chose to stay home at Pitt. You know, college was never in my plans. And so Pitt was just convenient for me.
Yeah. And you went on to Pitt after that. But there you were actually considered somewhat of an injury-prone player. You struggled with a lot of different injuries there. But then when you went to the NFL, you were one of the most consistent players in the league. We mentioned that you rushed for 1,000 yards in 10 straight seasons. So, and then towards the end of your career, you became the oldest player to lead the league in rushing. So, what did you do to improve and then maintain your health and longevity while playing football?
Well, I think what you saw, I think the difference that people saw in my career from college to high school was simply the difference between being committed and not being committed. You know, when I was in college, I was a knucklehead and I didn't take football serious. You know, I was one of those guys who would go out to the club, you know, until 2 o'clock in the morning and stay out even later and then go straight to football practice or study hall at 6 o'clock in the morning, and wouldn't sleep well, didn't like lifting weights, you know, none of that stuff. But I've always been a very focused guy when I'm focused, and I just wasn't focused on football. And so once I got injured in my senior year, which I was injured every year, but in my senior year, I played one game and then missed the rest of the season with an injury. I took some time to really get myself together and just decide what I wanted to make out of my life. And I figured that I was really good at this football thing, so I should make the most of it. And I just committed to working as hard as I could, training as hard as I could to be the best football player that I could possibly be. I just said to myself, I want to see what pans out from this. Didn't expect anything, but, you know, things turned out pretty well for me. A lot of people told me there's no way I could even survive in the NFL. And so I went into the NFL with this mentality and this chip on my shoulder that not necessarily was I going to prove everyone else wrong, but I was going to prove myself right, that I could do it if I just gave it the right type of attention.
Awesome. And so once you got into the league, I know that you had a great relationship with your coach, Bill Parcells, and he also played a big role in your move from the Patriots to the Jets. So can you tell us a little about your relationship with him?
Yeah, I literally just got off the phone with him about 35 minutes ago. And so we still have a tremendous relationship. He became like a father figure to me, especially after I retired. You know, Bill's a hard guy. So, you know, during my career, he doesn't allow you to get but so close to him. But after my career, he and I developed an even stronger relationship. And, we check on each other. And, he still gives me advice when I'm making big decisions in my life. I call Bill and say, Bill, what do you think about this, coach? And so we have great conversations, and we have an amazing relationship.
Great. And would you say there are any other inspiring coaches that you worked with during your NFL career?
Oh, yeah, there's so many. I don't know that I would have an NFL career if it wasn't for Maurice Carthon. He was a former Giants player, but he was coaching for the New England Patriots. And the story is that Bill told him, I heard about this kid at Pitt, and New England needed a running back. So he sent Maurice Carthon to Pitt, and he was the only scout that worked me out. No one else was really interested in me because of how injury prone I had been. And, Maurice Carthon gave me one of the hardest workouts that I've seen for a running back. But for lack of better words, I aced the test. And he said he went back to Bill and told him, look, I know there will be a lot of people who doubt what I'm about to say, but I think that Curtis is our man, and I think that he'll be an amazing back in the NFL. And Bill Parcells just told him, well, I'm taking your word for it, and he better pan out. And they drafted me.
Well, that's awesome. And I'm actually going to turn it over to TJ for a few more questions as we continue.
What would you say were the top 3 highlights of your career? Now, it can be like a play. It can be just sort of a moment. It can even be maybe something off the field. Maybe what would you say kind of like a top 3 moments?
You know what? I don't know if they're the top 3 moments, but I'll just talk about the 3 things about my career that stand out most as I think about them. One of the top moments in my career was one day as rookies. We come into rookie camp, and Parcells, it wasn't like it is today. Like back then, you could wear pads every single day and practice in pads twice a day and hit each other and try to, crush each other. It was totally different. But anyways, Parcells wakes us up early in the morning, earlier than what we're supposed to wake up. We're supposed to get up and be in meetings at 8. He wakes us up at 6, and he tells us to meet him on the field. We go to the field, and he has us do this 300-yard shuttle. What that is, it's the running test that we have to pass in order to, that's like our entry into camp. If you don't pass that test, there's like this severe penalty that you have to pay. And you have to go through all of this extra training and stuff before practice happens every day while you're in training camp. So anyways, he gets all the rookies up. He tells us to line up on the goal line, and he says, we're running a 300-yard shuttle. And none of us have prepared for this. We're like, what is that? And so they show us what it is. And what it is, you start on the goal line, you go 50 yards up, 50 yards back. That's 1. You do that 3 times, 50 yards up, 50 yards back, 50 yards up, 50 yards back, 50 yards up, 50 yards back. That's 1. And you have to do it, at my position, we had to do it in 54 seconds. And it is one of the most tiring tests that you can take. I mean, people who can run marathons can't pass this test. And so you do it that first time, and then, we're like, oh my gosh, that was, shoot, I can't even move my legs. And he's like, all right, line up again. And we have to run it a second time. And we had to pass it. You had to do it in 56 seconds.
Oh my God.
And after that, we're like, oh my, like everyone's dying. Like people are dropping out. People are like getting cramps, going to go see the doctors, and then he makes us run it a third time. And there were only a few of us left. I mean, out of you figure, say like 30 rookies or so, 40 rookies. I mean, there may have been 15 of us left at the end, at least half of us. So after we do that, we just feel like, oh my gosh, this is the worst day of our lives. And then he makes us line up and practice against one another. He puts the defense on one side, and we don't have on pass, but he just wants us to run the plays. And he keeps running this toss to the right and then toss to the left. And I'm the running back in there. And, we're rotating. And eventually, guys' legs and their they were so exhausted and overheating and everything that it dropped out to where we only had a center, a tight end, a tackle, 2 wide receivers, me and the quarterback. And he kept running the play over and over and over and over. And he said, I'm going to do this all day. I want to see what you're made of, And I said, and I'll never forget, and this is the moment that I remember. I looked at him and I said, Coach, I just want you to understand that I'm going to have to die out here before I stop these plays. I will crawl and take a handoff before I give up and go stand over there on the sideline like everybody else. And he just put it to the test, and he just kept doing it. And eventually I was almost walking the plays, but I wouldn't give up. So that was one of the most defining moments in my career, because I believe that I earned Coach Parcells' respect, and I think it made him want to invest in me because he saw the determination that I had. So that was number one. I know that was a long story for number one, but the second was probably my rookie year when I went back home to play the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm from Pittsburgh, and in Pittsburgh, the Steelers are like gods. And so going back home to play them was, it was bigger than everything, at that point in time. And so that was another time that was, one of the most memorable moments. And then playing in the Super Bowl my second year. A lot of people describe the intensity and the nerves that you have when you're playing in the Super Bowl, but it doesn't do it justice for when you're literally standing down there on the field and that ball is kicked off. It's such an adrenaline rush. Those were the 3 of my playing career. And then I would also say, being inducted into the Hall of Fame. That was a tremendous honor for me.
That's quite a package of moments. Not many people can say they did most of those things. That's just incredible, especially that story with Parcells. I don't know if you think that's something that a lot of coaches did, from your experiences talking to other players or working with other coaches, or is that just kind of something that was about who he was as a person, as a coach?
Well, that was his reputation. Everyone knew that Parcells was the hardest coach in the NFL. He didn't take any crap. And the thing is that if you wanted to work hard and be your best, you loved him as a coach. But if you had any BS in you, or if you were trying to not work hard or, skip steps or something, you didn't like Parcells because he always called you out on it. So I appreciate him for that, because that's where I learned to commit to the next level. And I'll never forget, he told me this story. He calls me out of practice one day, and he asked me if I had been working hard. And I said, of course, Coach, this is after I'm at the New York Jets. And I said, why did you ask me that? And he said, because I just want to make sure you're not fooling yourself. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he said, as long as you live, son, never forget that there's a big difference between routine and commitment. He said, a lot of people do the same routine over and over again, but few people commit to the next level. He said, so just never forget that. And that was just one of the principles out of the many that he taught me, that not only did I apply to my job on the field, but I applied to the other areas of my life, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. I'm always trying to commit to the next level.
Dang. That's great stuff, man. But we're gonna move on to our next thing. We're gonna try and have a little more fun now. So
okay.
Well, I don't know, fun, but just some more stuff. we're gonna. So you played in a time where, like you said, the game was really tough. People hit each other, so hard all the time. There weren't a lot of the kind of protections and rules that are in place now to kind of, make the game a little bit safer than it was. So, were there any one defensive player, or maybe even just a group of defensive players who you just found was tougher and the hardest team to face, every year or whenever you played them?
The hardest team for me to play against, so I'll say the hardest people. there's three people, no, four, who were my hardest competitors. Bruce Smith, he played for the Buffalo Bills, D lineman, just a beast. Tony Siragusa, you know, he played for the Ravens, and this guy weighed 400 pounds easily. And you would never think that he can keep up with someone, but I would, you know, get a sweep, you know, run all the way around the outside. And this guy was a nose guard, and he would always find a way to be out there on a tackle. I mean, this guy was one of the hardest guys to run against. So Bruce Smith, Tony Siragusa, Ray Lewis, who was a beast of a linebacker, and then Rodney Harrison, who was one of the hardest free safeties that I've ever played against.
That's quite a list, man. I mean, I can't, you know, those are the kind of guys you definitely hear about all the time. And so our next question, we have one. Our next one is sort of, so you've been an inspiration to a lot of running backs, including, you know, the current Jets running back Le'Veon Bell. He's talked a lot about you. So which kind of modern day running back who's sort of in the league today would you kind of think you're most similar to, has a game most similar to yours? And also, when you were playing, did there any other sort of players or backs you tried to sort of model your game off of, or you really, or stuff people use whose technique you tried to really copy or make or incorporate into your game?
You know, I think I always had, you know, I think big. And so I always wanted to be a cross between Walter Payton and Barry Sanders. You know, I never got there, but that was my goal. I mean, there's a lot of times before the games, I would just watch some of Barry Sanders' tapes, and some of the things that he would do would just be amazing to me. I mean, I would just marvel at some of the moves that he was able to make. And so I always admired Barry Sanders' running style. To me, he's probably the best running back to ever play in the NFL.
I mean, yeah, I mean, goats recognize goats is what they say.
Nah, I'm not. Me and Barry, we're in two different categories. that guy is phenomenal.
Good role model to have.
Yeah.
That way.
Yeah.
All right, now I got one more question because you know, Ryan, the Jets fan, all these guys are Jets fans. I'm a Patriots fan. I grew up in New England.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so there's one very famous moment that you happen to be on the Jets for, which is when Bill Belichick was your coach for exactly one day. So would you think anything of that moment? Did the players kind of, how was that taken by sort of the guys in the locker room and by you especially?
You know what? I don't even think the players paid too much attention to it. I know a lot of the guys were upset that he left. Because we thought that, you know, it was interesting. From the time I was a rookie, you know, Bill Belichick was in New England with Parcells when I was a rookie. And the DBs would come out of the meeting, and Ty Law and Jimmy Hitchcock and these guys, they would say, man, this guy's a freaking genius. And everyone always marveled about the way Bill Belichick saw the game. And to see the way players would respond to him, everybody knew that he was going to be a phenomenal head coach. And so when he became our coach for that one day, when Bill retired, that was the first thing that all of us thought, like, oh, cool, well, we got Bill Belichick, so we might not miss too much of a beat. And then when he retired and went to New England, that kind of caught a lot of us off guard. But, you know, in the NFL, it's a business in a huge respect. So it's almost business as usual. You just say this is part of the game and you keep it moving.
I mean, did you have any, you know, you said you thought that he was really good. Do you have any idea he would kind of become what he became and sort of like, you know,
no, I didn't think he would be this good, to be honest with you, because he had previously been the head coach of the Cleveland Browns and they didn't do too well. But I'm not surprised at his success because it's like he had it. It was just a matter of it coming out and him getting the right personnel and everything. I think Tom Brady helps too. You know, Tom Brady definitely helps when you have him as a quarterback. You always have a chance to win. But Belichick, I think he really flourished when he got on his own and when he had everything he needed in New England to build the type of organization that he wanted to build. And I think he's one of the greatest coaches of all time. I don't know of any coach who I would say has his football IQ.
I mean, you hear that a lot, and to hear from you as a player, it definitely means, it speaks even more about sort of Bill and the whole thing. Now,
Yeah.
I said before, we got a lot of Jets fans on here. So I want to ask you one question which is sort of has to do with the Jets this year. Now, there's the division, AFC East, Tom Brady is gone. A lot of people are saying it's wide open, and they think the Jets have a great chance to kind of do a lot better this year than they have before, maybe begin a new chapter. So I really want to get your opinion on sort of what you think is in store for the Jets this year in 2020, maybe, how they did in the draft or how you think maybe their current players are going to develop.
Well, I'm excited for, I think they have all the pieces. And then this year they got I think they needed some protection. I think they needed a couple more receivers, in my opinion. I think that they'll do well on defense this year. And with Le'Veon, and I'm really looking forward to see the growth of of Darnold. I think that he has the ability to be one of the exceptional quarterbacks in the NFL. Quarterback is just a very, very difficult position. I mean, you'll see guys like Drew Brees flourish later in his career, or it's hard to come right into the NFL and have success. Patrick Mahomes is, again, he's just a freak of nature. But I think Sam Darnold has a whole lot of potential, and I think we have yet to see we haven't seen even close to the best of him, in my opinion. So I think that they'll be in the playoffs this year. I don't know how far they'll go, but I do think they'll be in the playoffs.
I'd like to hear that.
What you say?
Heard it here first.
I said I like to hear that.
Yeah. And with Tom Brady out of the NFC East, the AFC East, again, I do think it's wide open. I'm hoping that the Jets can take that place.
And I think it's going to be, one of, if not the most exciting divisions in the league this year, and I'm really excited to watch it happen.
Yeah.
All right, so our final question is, because we are primarily an Instagram publication, so we're going to do something that is really popular on Instagram and social media, which is we're going to ask you to kind of try and build a perfect running back. So if you can combine sort of the speed, the power, the vision, the agility, and sort of the receiving power, or we can go sort of one by one, break it down for you, sort of, and combine sort of traits of different players into one sort of ultimate player. We're going to try and ask you kind of whose kind of skills would you want to pick for sort of each thing. So like, who's like the speediest, the fastest running back ever, you think?
Something? This is a really easy question for me, because I think if you take Barry Sanders, if you take his agility, his ability to make you miss, if you take the speed of someone like a Tyreek Hill or someone like that, or and if you take the heart of someone like a Walter Payton, who's much before you guys' time, and you take the ability to catch the ball out of the field, out of the backfield. You take all of those things and a football IQ and the ability to be tough, because a lot of people really underestimate how tough you have to be a running back and be good and consistent as a running back in the NFL. It takes a different mentality. But if you take all of those things and put them into one, I think you get Saquon Barkley. Yeah, Saquon Barkley, I don't know if you guys ever saw the movie Weird Science, but it was where these college kids wanted to make the perfect woman, and they put all these different, the best body, the best, boobs, the best, hair, the best looks, everything into this machine, and a real woman came out. But I think if you were to do that same thing for a running back, Saquon Barkley would come out.
Dang, that's pretty. I've not heard that one before. That's pretty high praise.
Yeah, for sure.
No, that dude, I mean, from a talent standpoint, he is one of the most impressive, like just naturally gifted running backs that I've seen in a long time.
I remember watching him, and the first time I watched him was when I think it was Penn State, Michigan, a couple of years ago, and I was just thinking, who the heck is this guy, man? He was taking returns back, he was taking these long runs. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, and he has the speed. He's the closest to, you know, a Barry Sanders, because he can make you miss everything, and just he has the right build for a running back. That's prototype how you want a running back to be built.
You think he can? You think that they think the Giants were right to draft him instead of a quarterback a couple of years ago?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Yeah. I mean, I guess they got their guy. All right. Well, I'm gonna hand sort of the questions over to Ryan for a moment. We're gonna kind of change course, talking about not just the league and football. We're gonna talk about sort of things that are going on in the world, because we know you're involved in a lot of really important stuff right now.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, I'll take it over from TJ again, and we'll jump back into the questions on the current events. So one thing that's been on everyone's minds for the past few months is the coronavirus pandemic, and a lot of people are worried about the way that the NFL is going to, whether or not the NFL will return this fall, and if it does, the way it's going to look. So do you think that it will be safe for the NFL to return this fall? And if so, do you think that any changes need to be made to make it more safe for players, coaches, referees, and other staff?
Again, I don't think that I'm smart enough to know if it'll be safe or not. I think that there's people who are much smarter, you know, like TJ's dad, who can, you know, let us know whether or not it's safe. I think that what I'm hoping doesn't happen is that we do things too early or not with the right cadence. And this whole coronavirus just, you know, there's coronavirus 2.0 and 3.0. So that's what I'm hoping doesn't happen. I know the NFL, you know, they really want to make sure that the players are safe and everyone's safe, the staff is safe. So they're not going to do anything without the best advice in the world. And so I don't know how that'll play out. I hope that there's a season, even if it's without fans. I hope that there's a season, because I think that the NFL is such a huge part of society. And I think that people have been starving for live sports, and in particular, football being the largest sport in America and somewhat in the world. I just think it would be good for society if they could get back to playing, but it first must be safe.
Yeah, and you mentioned a way to maybe make things safer was a season without fans. And a couple of people, even including players in the league, have proposed some changes that the NFL could make if there are no fans at games, like pumping in fake crowd noise or having like computer-generated fans on TV, or maybe miking up all the players to sort of get a feel for what goes on down on the field. So what are your thoughts on any of those ideas?
No, I think so. I think that you can still maybe have a field or a stadium, and even if it was in one stadium, you can make it feel like it's a home stadium for a player just by the, you know, the boos and the cheers. They go a long way when you're down on that field. I mean, and when you start hearing, like when you're sitting on the bench or you're out there on the field and you hear that crowd going JETS, I mean, like that does something to you. So it does play a factor. But at the end of the day, if there are no fans and there are no chairs and there are no, you know, boos or whatever, we'll all be playing. They will all be playing under the same circumstances. So it still is a fair situation for everyone.
Mm. And on another topic, moving away from the NFL, the death of George Floyd and the resulting protests this week surrounding police brutality and racial injustice have been on the minds of many Americans. So do you have any thoughts on those issues, and maybe as they relate to the league?
Well, I'll just speak on my thoughts. Number one, it's like even watching that it really makes you frustrated as a Black person. I think any person, period, but especially as a Black person, because as a Black man, like I've been stopped and racially profiled. And, you know, and then maybe the cop finds out who I am once he takes my license and registration, and things might change. But I have several friends and relatives who that wasn't the case. And for me, a couple of times, you know, it was really because there was this one time where literally I felt like this cop can shoot me in my face and probably get off with it. You know, and I just think in the Black community, when you see something like a guy just with his neck, I mean, with his knee on someone's neck, the way George Floyd, I mean, it's really just disgusting. And I think that it touches a core part of you as a Black person because, you know, there's this sense of injustice that you've heard about all your life, you've watched all your life, and you've seen your friends or people you know go through certain things or put in jail unlawfully or whatever it may have been. And there's this growing sense, I believe, in the Black community that things are just unfair sometimes. And I think that is really starting to boil over in the Black community.
Yeah, I can understand why you might be frustrated, and it's good to hear your thoughts on that. But to close things up on a little bit of a lighter note, I know you're doing a lot of charity work these days. So can you tell?
You know something? Hold on. Let me just say one more thing about the George Floyd thing.
No problem.
Yeah, no problem.
I think what really impacts a lot of the Black community's minds is that, you know, in a lot of Black communities, like the community I come from, it was hard before coronavirus. And, you know, the rest of the world, they, gets to feel the difficulty of not having the ability to work or not having the appropriate food or whatever it may have been. Like, I think coronavirus has brought that into a broader population in America. But a lot of people in the environments like where I come from, that's more common. And so when you take that pain and that frustration and that struggle, and then you put the coronavirus on top of it, and then something like George Floyd happens, which is a string, which is just kind of like the latest of what we've seen happen in the past, it really creates a different level of anger and frustration because every Black man, regardless of how much money you have or how famous you are, you know that could have been you lying there with someone's knee on your neck.
That's very true. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
So yeah, as I was saying though, you are trying to work and help your community these days. You're working with the Curtis Martin Job Foundation, and so can you tell us a little bit about your charity work and how people could potentially support you if they choose to?
Yeah, so it's actually called the Curtis Martin Job Foundation, and it's a guy, Job, from the Bible, and who went through this. He went through hell and high water, and he ended up coming out on the other end, and life ended up being pretty good for him thereafter, but he had to go through a whole lot of trials. And so, I thought that was a story that somewhat mimicked my life. I didn't have it as nearly as hard as Job. So that's why I named my foundation back when I was a rookie, the Job Foundation. And I started it to help mothers who were like my mother. My mother was a single parent mother who had to work 2 and 3 jobs just to keep clothes on my back and food on the table. And we lived in like a low income housing, somewhat project type of environment. And, looking back in hindsight now, one of the most fulfilling things is being able to, just the fact that my mother doesn't have to work if she doesn't want to anymore. It does my heart a lot of good. And so the Job Foundation started to help support single parent mothers who are struggling just to raise their kids and keep food on the table. And from there, it, went into homelessness and education. And then I started, sending doctors to third world countries to do surgeries for free for those who couldn't afford it. And so that's what I've been doing with that foundation. And I support a lot of other foundations, like the Dream Academy. Well, it's not necessarily a foundation, but it's a nonprofit school that is amazing. And several other, there's another program that I really like that I support called Jumpstart. And what they do is they hire college students to read with children in low-income environments on a daily basis. When I was growing up, and it's pretty normal, like right now, we read to my two daughters almost every night. But when I was growing up, there was no one, I'm talking about in the entire environment that I can remember, at 4, 5, 6 years old, sitting down with their parents, reading books or fairy tales or things like that. Yeah, we may watch cartoons, but just to be able to pick up a book and read a book, that just didn't happen so often. And, the science has shown that actually hinders a person's ability to communicate and make it through the world. And so this charity that I support called Jumpstart is one of my favorites because I think it gives people and kids who are in my position that advantage of just learning how to read and be better at reading, more confident in their speaking at a younger age.
Well, that's awesome. It's good to hear. Good to hear that you're still staying involved even after you're long out of the league. And that's all the questions that we have for you today. So thanks for interviewing us, Mr. Martin.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's my pleasure, man. And like my whole thing, what ended up giving me my kind of love for the game was the fact that I realized I could use football to do all of the charitable or philanthropic things that I'm doing today. And so that's what drove me to have 10 straight 1,000-yard seasons, or to make it to the Pro Bowl, or to make it to the Hall of Fame. It was really because I knew that at the end of the day, it would just open up more doors and give me more resources and relationships to help and serve people today.